As we begin today's event, I request all of you to stand for a moment. In memory of all those we have lost in the way, and for all those blessings that we need for this day to happen as a wonderful day, let us seek blessings. Thank you. I request Mr. Abraham Zakaria, the Honorary National Treasurer of ICSW, to come to the dais and give the welcome address.
In one of the college lecterns, there was a note printed saying that blessed are the ones who speak lesser, they will be invited again. President of Madras School of Social Work, Mr. K. Matthew AS, guest of honor, Mr. AJIT ISSAC, dignitaries, respected teachers, young friends, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to first Dr. K. N. George Memorial Lecture. I had been associated with Dr. George for 15 years. His wife, Mrs. George, and I were part of an organization. He found me going out with her regularly and made me the auditor of MSSW. He's a gem of a person, except for the first 1 minute. Those who knew him know it. And some of them smiling. I know Anita is here. He was associated with the MSSW almost 70 years and joined as a lecturer, moved on to become the dean, later as the general secretary. He was a pioneer of social service, social work education in South India. He served on the boards of many national and international councils. He also created a network of NGOs in state and national level, and ICSW, or Indian Council of Social Service, is one such organization. We plan to come out with his memos to highlighting his life and contribution. Without much ado, let me move on to my very pleasant task of welcoming all of you, especially the chairman of the meeting and the guest of honor. Chairman of MSSW, Mr. K. Matthew, is an upright officer who held many important and sensitive posts in Tamil Nadu. On behalf of all of you, especially MSSW, ICSW, and K. N. George Foundation, I welcome Mr. Matthew to this meeting. Guest of honor, Mr. AJIT was a student of this college who made MSSW proud. He is a chairman of Corp. He is a self-made man and reached the heights through his determination and dedication. I understand that his focus is on long-term sustainable health and education projects. On behalf of all of you and MSSW and ICSW and K. N. George Foundation, I welcome Mr. AJIT ISSAC, our guest of honor, to deliver the Dr. K. N. George Memorial Lecture. My special welcome to Mr. Muthu Thanuk, General Secretary of MSSW, my good friend, Treasurer C.A. John Zakaria, Mrs. Sujit Murali, founder of Sakti for Life, Dean Dr. Suhasini, Mr. Balaji, President of Alumni Association, Office Bearers of Alumni Association, batch of 1990, that is AJIT batch. I met two friends there. Students of MSSW, Office Bearers of ICSW and Dr. K. N. George Foundation, family members and friends of Dr. K. N. George, and Dr. Sudharmati, staff coordinator for this meeting, and our vibrant General Secretary of ICSW, Tamil Nadu, Mrs. Padma Anil Kumar. I welcome all of them. Let's give a round of applause to all of you. I welcome all of you once again. Thank you so much.
I now call upon Mr. K. A. Matthew, the Honorary Chairman of MSSW, to give the presidential address.
Mr. Abraham Zakaria, Chief Guest of the Day, Mr. AJIT ISSAC, Mrs. Padma, Mr. Muthukumar Thanu, Mr. Suchit Murali, and Ms. Anita Koshi. My dear friends, doesn't mean that these people whose names were called out are not my friends. As a civil servant, I knew Professor K.N. George as Professor George of MSSW. His name was inseparably connected to Madras School of Social Work. He single-handedly nurtured the institution in its infancy and nourished it during its difficult times, and was the face of MSSW in civil society and in government. You see, the difference between an ordinary leader and an extraordinary leader is the difference between a milestone and a lighthouse. When you travel in the highway, you come across milestones with boring regularity. All of the same size, all the same appearance, but impersonal, impervasive, and impassive, giving you information which you may or may not require. But lighthouses are tall, few and far between, and they give guidance and light to those people who are wandering in the sea, the plundering ships and the hapless sailors who seek the safety of the shore. I would consider Professor K.N. George, in spite of, as Mr. John Zakaria said, not being a gentleman for more than a minute, as an extraordinary leader, because he gave light and succor to hundreds of students with a sense of devotion, with a sense of commitment, with a fierce determination through decades of hard work. That has to be appreciated. He belonged to a category of institution builders. Though Mary Clubwala Yadav planted the seed, he nourished it, he watered it, and the big tree that you see today he's the author of it, he's the architect of it, he's the builder of it. We need to acknowledge that fact. It's appropriate that Mr. AJIT ISSAC gives the first KNG Memorial Lecture on livelihood and opportunities in resurgent India. It is appropriate because he's doing the same thing. He's giving livelihood and opportunities to thousands of people today. So he is the most appropriate person to start to talk on the subject. You see, we in the history of human development are at a very critical juncture now. Alvin Toffler, the celebrated author, in his seminal work, The Third Wave, divided the human history by marking the revolutions: agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, and the third one he called chip revolution. Agricultural revolution, as you know, greatly brought the hunger of the world under control, and industrial revolution improved the quality of life of a human being in all spheres of life. But of course, along with came certain other things like ozone depletion, pollution, and ecological imbalance. But there is no unmixed blessing in this world. Now, what he called chip revolution, what we refer to as AI, is going to make irreversible changes in our patterns of behavior. When I was a student of business administration, we were told that customer is always right. Then we were told customer is king. Neither is it true. Customer is being manipulated now. You are neither a king nor right. Now, you look at genetics, seeds are being mutated, seeds and vegetables are controlled genetically, even animals are being hacked into. So when the time comes, it will be only a question of time when human beings become mere algorithms. But this is going to impact our lives so much that, you know, if you have enough data, if you have enough computing power, you don't need soldiers even to fight a war. You don't need, everything is going to become a new order. So, difficult times are ahead, but then it is inevitable. It is irreversible, it is inevitable. So in this scenario, that's why I described this as a critical juncture. And it also strikes me that both Mr. AJIT ISSAC and artificial intelligence have the same notation, AI. So in this time zone, this AI gives livelihood and opportunities to thousands of people. And in a time to come, AI will give livelihood and opportunities to thousands of people. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir, for that befitting presidential address. Now, before we actually start and listen to who we are here for, I'd like you to know the history behind this particular program that we have started. You all heard that it is going to be an annual memorial lecture. So Mr. K.N. George, Professor K.N. George, Dr. K.N. George, I met him in 2018 when he requested me to do a seminar for ICSW. After we did that seminar, he said, Padma, I want to start this memorial lecture series, and this is my aim. I want eminent speakers to come and address the students of Madras School of Social Work to realize that there are so many opportunities that's awaiting them, to make them completely channeled towards giving back to society in the best possible way, etc., etc., etc. I joined ICSW as a member the month after he passed away. I guess I didn't and I couldn't see that dream of his fulfilled. And today, when I stand here, I am nostalgic. I'm rather very emotional to say that, sir, today I am going to start this particular lecture with one person I great awe for, though at that time I didn't, my classmate, my friend, since 1988, 89, 90, Mr. AJIT ISSAC. We are starting with this memorial lecture where, as a batchmate, I have seen, we've just forwarded his messages and done, you know, thumbs up and smiles and things like that. To hear him today is a special honor. And while I was doing research on what do I say about him, I realized, oh my God, I'm sure I didn't attend the classes he attended. I'm sure I missed those days when he got all this knowledge, and I'm going to see that for real just now. So what is ICSW? ICSW is the Indian Council of Social Welfare. It was established in 1947, inaugurated as the Indian Conference of Social Work at the first All India Conference of Social Work held in Mumbai. This organization has been the advocacy panel for starting off the Social Welfare Board for the ministry, what is today the Ministry of Social Welfare. So it has been the advocacy or the panel which actually supported the start of a Department of Social Welfare. Since then, it has been the respected organization, pioneer organization in Chennai especially, headquartered in Mumbai. We have centers all over India, and we are still affiliated to the International Council of Social Welfare also. So this organization has been looking into adoption services, the creche services, and it had the elders services also. There's so much said about Mr. K.N. George. So he actually was the president from the beginning at ICSW. And since then, it's almost so many years that we have a place in TB Chatram, one of the largest slums in Chennai, where I remember even I did my field work there. So it was way back then that it was very, very active. And today we want to actually start off many more activities just as Professor George would dream it to be. Now moving on to the most beautiful task of today is introducing Mr. Ajit Abraham Isaac. So it's AAI, a gold medalist, alumni of the Madras School of Social Work batch of 1990. Is also a British Chevening Scholar from Leeds University. He set up Quess Corp in 2007 after spending close to 15 years at various corporates in the human resource sector. As India's largest business service provider, Quess Corp operates in India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and North America. It provides a host of technology, enables staffing, and operates through workforce management, operating asset management, and global technology solutions segments. Ajit Isaac is on the list of India's top philanthropists. He had laid out a 14-point charter. He had laid out a 14-point charter for CareWorks Foundation, the CSR arm of his company. But he went far beyond that. When it was established in 2014, the charter, planning, and strategy to achieve the goals are creating long-term impact for children and youth in terms of education and healthcare. He doesn't want me to quote what exactly he did for the CMC as well as the IISC. You can read it, Google it if you want to. It empowers over 14,800 students in 61 schools, and that is the CSR arm. But imagine what and how he's giving back to medical research, to education, and to all of us, more than anything else, to the batch of 1990, a good friend. So I invite Mr. Ajit Isaac to come on the dais and share the little that we can understand today. Thank you.
Thank you, Padma. Dignitaries present here, faculty, classmates of mine from the 1988-1990 batch, students and friends. The last time that I was here was in the year 1990 to receive the Maria Philip Gold Medal Award for a student who was passing out from that batch. And nostalgia fills you when you see this room here, the eagerness and enthusiasm of the students, and we sat with the same set of eyes looking at everything that was going on the podium. This alma mater is a terrific place. It's since it was set up, maybe 20,000 students have passed out from this institute. Careers have been created, and more than anything else, led to life experiences for so many students. My own batch had about 50 of them. About 30 of us are always in touch, almost on a daily basis. We have a WhatsApp group and we're fairly active, and we know the goings on of everybody else. So what does an alma mater do to your life, you know? First of all, it's where it all starts in terms of your knowledge, in terms of your relationships, and in terms of your experiences in life. Some of you come here and even get married and go. In my batch, it did happen. So, you know, it starts off and culminates in many ways, and I think MSSW is a great starting point for everyone else. I want to spend a minute also on Dr. Kane George before I get into the topic of the day. Dr. Kane George was truly one of the most inspiring people that you would come across in your life. He was one in a generation of institution builders. You should look upon him as somebody like Mr. Vishwesharaya was, or Mr. Swaminathan was for agriculture. Dr. Kane George's contribution to creating professionals in the area of social impact is unparalleled. And I think a lot of his thinking centered around creating capacity in society to deal with the problems that the government cannot reach, in reaching people who are on the periphery of society. And to that extent, he was an outstanding success. The reason why we are all here today, to talk to each other, to ideate, and to grow our careers is because of this man. And I think he's an outstanding example of how to live your life. It's a life well spent. His own daughter is here, and they were family friends of ours. So I'll want to get started with the topic of the day, and in that, to get it started, I'd like to go back a bit to India since independence. I would guess the average age here in this hall, if you take all of us from the first row out, or the second row also out, is maybe about 22 to 23 years old. So maybe people born in the 90s. So for all of you to know a little bit about where India started from, where this resurgence of India comes from is of consequence, because you should know what our starting points are. Everything that's coming from China today is abhorred. It's not considered to be good, but there's one statement from China that I can't forget. If you forget the past, you're condemned to repeat it. So it's good to know where you came from and what were the experiences that India had. In 1947, when India got independence, India was coming out of a great Bengal famine. The famine happened in 1943. About 3 million people died that time in the famine. India's population then was about 330 million, give or take a bit. Census estimates were never really entirely accurate. So roughly about 1% of India died in the famine of 1943. It was a very tough moment. And then you had the partition that happened. Estimates vary between 10 to 20 million of people transitioned between the two borders, between Pakistan and India. And these were family upheavals. These were not ordinary movements or migrations of people. These were people who were rooted in certain places, taken out of their environment, and transshipped to an entire place where they knew nothing out of. So about 10 to 20 million people, they had to handle a migration process. In addition to that, we had 562 princely states in India. Imagine today we've got 28 odd states and union territories. They had 562 princely states. For Professor K.N. George, for Mr. T.K. Nair, for Professor Vishweshwaran, who were our lecturers that time, to manage 30 students in a class was tough. Imagine how you manage 560 states, all with different languages, different armies, different rules, different cultures. That was the background that India inherited as a country in 1947. 3 years into independence, India did very well. We managed the ascension of all the princely states. We sorted out the law and order problem, and state-wise divisions were settled along established lines, not necessarily on linguistic basis at that point of time. But in 1950, which is the next landmark, in India's milestone, like Mr. Matthew was mentioning about milestones in a person's journey. India became a republic. What does becoming a republic mean? Means you adopt a constitution, you have a set of laws, and you have a set of beliefs on which the country exists. So India became a constitution and became the first constituent assembly in the Commonwealth of Nations, which was the residue of the previous British Empire. So 1950 was when India became a republic, and that's how we celebrate the Republic Day thereafterwards. The next big event was actually the Indo-Chinese War that happened in 1962. But in between, India came up as a socialist republic. We had the Mahalanobis model of commanding heights theory in terms of investments, in terms of building the public sector. It was a mixed economy. In those days, there was on one extreme, the capitalist system, which was led by the American system. And on the other extreme, there was the communist system where everything was owned by the state. And somewhere in between, we came up with our own theory known as the mixed economy, more or less of a socialist type, led by a very informed economist of those times called Professor Mahalanobis, who led what is then known as the Mahalanobis, the commanding heights theory of development. So India grew a series of public sector units. There was SAIL, there was petrochemical units, there was energy units, there were power units. There were a lot of large institutions were set up. The privatization that's taking place right now of Air India, of SAIL, of NTPC and other such institutions came from the investments that we made in the 50s and 60s. So that's some historical background that you must have. And then 1962 was a sort of a learning year for our country. We lost territory in the war. In 1959 was when the Tibetan uprising was there. India supported the ethnic people of Tibet to establish a place for Tibetans in India, and we gave asylum to Dalai Lama. And Dalai Lama, the world leader, still lives in India, which is a topic not much liked by the Chinese. So over a period of 12 to 18 months, after a round of a series of discussions between India and China, which did not lead to a settlement of border disputes, India actually went to war with China, not exactly of our choice, but forced on us. We lost the Aksai Chin area. We lost significant territory in that. About between 5,000 to 7,000 people were either wounded or died in that battle. India's armed forces were relatively unprepared for battle compared to China. The biggest gains that India came away from the war was that we need to build an armed force. We need to create a strong retaliatory ability to our borders if ever there was a push again. And India built thereafterwards a strong army. India's army went on to become the second largest army in the world. But the beginnings of it came out of the Aksai Chin and the Chinese war. The other learning was that Indo-China bye-bye theory in terms of foreign relations fell apart. We always thought that the Chinese and Indians were brothers and sisters, and that fell away. You know, almost about 7 out of 10 people in this room must be using Chinese phones. But don't consider them to be your brothers and sisters anymore. We are very competitive in almost every sphere of life. After the Chinese war, remember, we built our army back. So we had greater fighting force. And then came the 1971 war, a sort of misadventure that Pakistan tried to get onto India. They tried to acquire territory from India. India's army was well prepared. We not only defended, but also gained some territory in the process. Again, maybe another, between 4,000 to 5,000 people died in that war. But more importantly, it established India as a stronger country. Indira Gandhi was then the prime minister, led the country very bravely, and then we ended up with an amount of victory. It also led to the liberation of Bangladesh. There was a Mukti Bahini movement in Bangladesh at that time, led by a gentleman called Mujibur Rahman. And we helped the creation of Bangladesh. Bangladesh, you must remember today, after creation of a nation state in 1971, has a growth rate in GDP that's better than India's. So it's, you should never think that we get infiltrators coming in from Bangladesh. If any, there should be people from India going to Bangladesh, the other way around, because in many ways, it has better economic indicators than India today. After that, in 1977, 75, 77, we had the imposition of emergency. That was a sort of landmark event again in India, when civil rights were taken away. Internal disturbances was the cost on the basis of which emergency was imposed. Forcible sterilization of men happened, and I think it was one of the darkest periods for India. The Congress party lost its power in the subsequent election, 1977. We had the Jayaprakash movement that was launched in Bihar, and as a consequence of which we had for the first time a large non-Congress representation parliament. Morarji Desai, there was Indira Gandhi herself lost the elections in Raebareli to then Raj Narayan. Raj Narayan went on to become the health minister. And then after that, we had 3 years of their rule culminating in elections again. So that was emergency then. The next big event in India was the economic crisis of 1990-1991. Chandrasekhar was then the Prime Minister of India. And the Finance Minister of India was then Yashwant Sinha, today who is formerly, he was in the BJP and now outside the BJP. India's balance of payments position came down to maybe 15 days. That means we had enough forex to buy 15 days of commodities that we wanted. We didn't have enough dollars with us. So the only thing to do then was that we had to sell gold stashed in our reserve bank. We sold gold to the Bank of England. We sold gold to Switzerland. And we got back dollars. And with that, we sorted out the crisis for a small period. Before we had the crisis, for the first time in India, the budget was not passed in Parliament. And it was a crisis. You know what happens if a budget is not passed in Parliament, because you don't have money to pay government servants, you don't have money to pay subsidies, you don't have money to pay armed forces. And India was facing one of its biggest ever crises ever. So we got past that. But every crisis leads to growth. And that you will see in world history. You know, after World War II, you found Germany and Japan rise from the ashes and became large economies. India too, after 1990, the crisis that we had, we sold gold, got forex, but we came out of it. We came out of the crisis, and then started the liberalization movement in India. So previous to 1990, you didn't have telecom, you didn't have mobile phones, you didn't have retail shops, you didn't have private sector banks because banks were nationalized in 1967, 1968. And then you didn't have insurance companies that could draw foreign direct investment into it. All of this they liberalized through a period of about 8 to 9 years between 1990 and 2000. So then we had new industries that came in, new industries that did not have a legacy in the past. These are industries that started off without labor unions, without long-term settlements, stuff that we're all trained to do here in this college as part of the PMIR course. But then that led to the growth in India. So the growth in India happened, if you see, from 1950, then from 1990, and now in sort of an epochal moment. So I'd like to focus on these 3 points of time during the further course of this presentation. In 1999, after that, we had the Kargil War. That's again an important moment. We had Operation Vijay that was run by the government. We lost close to about 2,000 people. We fought battles at 16,000 feet. 16,000 feet high, we fought battles. You know, where if you touch metal with bare skin, your skin molds with metal. It becomes one. That was the condition in which our soldiers fought, and we won battles there. All this goes back to our preparation from 1970, you know, after the Chinese war, when we rebuilt our military. So our military got together in shape. We launched Operation Vijay. We recovered territory, and we, more than anything else, retained the commanding heights on which Kargil sits today, imposing a very difficult condition on Pakistan to come back and capture any more territory in the Ladakh region. After 1999, you had then the Y2K era, then you had the enterprise revolution in IT, and then you had what you call is the first phase of the internet revolution, www. version 1. The economy was on a sprint from 2000 to about 2007. Everybody, you know, we used to say in our company at that time, if you send somebody to walk in front of a company, you know, like an IBM or Texas Instruments and Accenture, or, you know, anybody else of that type, they would get hired if somebody just walked in front of them, because that was the size of requirement of people. And enormous number of people were recruited. A number of students from MSSW joined PMIR, from the PMIR batch, joined in companies. So in the southern parts of India, you will find most human resource departments staffed by HR students from here. They were involved with this revolution of hiring enormous number of people for IT companies. This led to an issue in the United States particularly. A lot of people took housing loans, you know, and in housing loans, all housing loans are not of the same quality. In the sense, you find one house, let's say, I'm just taking a name, let's say in Padi or somewhere else, on the outskirts of Madras. Some may even argue today Padi is no longer outskirts. So Padi is now part of Chennai, right in the middle of the city. But let's say the house was in a place that was not a prime area. And then the quality of the borrower, let's say I went and took a loan for a small house, and I'm not a prime quality borrower. So I became a subprime owner of property. And what did banks do? Subprime assets, they brought it together in one bucket, collateralized it, and then sold it as what is called as collateralized debt assets, CDAs. So you will gather 100 subprime assets, put into one bucket, and sell it all to one bank who carried it on their balance sheet and not on the lender's balance sheet. Subprime assets, the value of it fell dramatically in an economic meltdown. House owners were unable to pay their rentals and they pay their EMIs, as a result of which the subprime assets, the EMI on that was not coming back to banks. This collapsed 2-3 banks in rapid succession, Lehman Brothers, and then 2-3 other subprime banks. There were reissuers of capital in the housing finance sector. For example, if HDFC is a lender, HDFC is refinanced by the National Housing Bank. So the refinanciers lost capital in this, and like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and a few others. These are big institutions. These are institutions that's built over a period of a lifetime. America put money into them, and then They were too big to fail and then helped them survive. Lehman Brothers did not, but that was what is a global financial crisis. That crisis led to the development of a financial system. You had the Glass-Steagall Act that came there afterwards. You had many sorts of legislation that came to help ensure that balance sheets of banks became rock steady. So again, a crisis, again, you're seeing, leads to an improvement. Always that's what happens. And then the banking system recovered, India recovered again from that. So that was the global financial crisis. We've had 13 prime ministers before Modi. Mr. Modi is the 14th prime minister. I'm putting it down as an event only because he's the current prime minister and we're seeing the sort of changes that's happening right now. And then 2 years later, after he became the prime minister, we had the demonetization. 99.3% almost of all our rotating currency inside the country was taken out and replaced. So which means everything that we had in our pockets was considered to be not worth. You had to go and acquire new currency. It was a difficult moment from the country, and I think India came out of it well, but we replaced 500 and 100 rupee notes with 500 and 2000 rupee notes. And that was a sort of, I would think, it was going in the opposite direction of what demonetization should do. But India learned a lot from that. And finally, we had the COVID outbreak in the year 2000. You know, we were thinking at one point in time, we did an acquisition of a hospital group. We paid, perhaps the largest acquisition, we paid about 800 crores to buy that hospital group. We were thinking there were two assets in the world that will never see a crisis, which was healthcare and education. Because you'll always want to send your kids to study, and you'll always want to get yourself healed in case you have a medical issue. And then bingo, in 2000 we have a crisis where we have both these sectors under pressure. So, you know, we learned a lesson from that. Never say that nothing will happen. Nature has a way of figuring out that something will happen to you. And it was unimaginable what happened in COVID. Estimates vary. Between 4 lakh and 4 million people died in India. 4 lakh and 4 million. You know, look, the gap is huge. Almost about 80% of India's population was in some way impacted by COVID. Either one in the family got it, or you got variations of COVID which are not detected. The one single entity that saved our country was Serum Institute of India. You know, because of Covishield and because of the quality of the vaccine developed by AstraZeneca in a lab in the UK, in a lab that is owned by university. The vaccine actually came from a university. It didn't come from a corporate establishment. And that was commercialized, and that went on to feed into to the pandemic. The lesson that we have to see here is the importance of academic institutions in this. Who would have ever thought that the virus would be beaten by a vaccine that came out of a lab inside a university? And that's why universities and colleges have a big role to play. MSSW itself, in terms of its research, in terms of its reports, and what it does in social impact, will have a lot of meaning for this generation. So this is sort of the background of where India came from 1950 to 2023, where we are. I'd like to also now go through a short story with you, and this is a real story. This is a story about a guy who works in one of our, we have 510,000 employees, 510,000 employees. This guy is one of them. Not the guy you see on the screen, but his son. But let's take a look at this. You know, Ram Bola lives in Aurangabad. Aurangabad is sort of in the middle of India. You draw a line from top to bottom, and then from left to right. It's somewhere in the intersection of these two lines that you'll find Aurangabad. He was 33 years old then. You know, like anybody who's 33 years old here in the room today, roundabout, so you'll know the situation in your life. He was just building his family. He had 5 children then, which was sort of the average. You know, people had more children in those days than they have today. They had 5 children. He was a farmer by occupation, and he had his bullock and his ox. Have any of you heard of the music group called Jethro Tull? Old timers have Jethro Tull. So Jethro was actually the inventor of the agricultural implement called the hoe that you find, and that's how, you know, the group was named Jethro Tull. And this was his prime asset, his ox and his hoe. And then his annual income then was about 2,800 rupees. So he made about, let's say, 200, 250 rupees a month. That was his income. How would he communicate then? He used to communicate by telegrams. I have to tell you a story here. When I graduated from Madras School of Social Work, I got a job in Godrej & Boyce in Bombay to work in Vikhroli as a management trainee. My communication to me of my selection in Godrej and Boys in Vikhroli came to me through a telegram. It didn't come by fax, it didn't come by an email, it didn't come by an SMS, it didn't come by WhatsApp. None of these existed. So much like Bolaram had access to telegrams in communication then, I got my first mail about my first job on telegram. How did he, and his transportation and communication mostly by the bullock cart or by a local bus that they had there. Healthcare, primary healthcare. Primary means if you have access to fever, cold, and your first level of response was about 20 kilometers away, and the nearest city was 40 kilometers. So imagine you're in Egmore right now, you have to travel 20 kilometers, almost near ECR, to go and get your first bit of healthcare. And that was a condition that he lived in. And then, of course, insurance was sort of non-existent that time. It was not even on the dictionary. Then come back and look at his son, Arav Bola, who works with us. Arav Bola, 33 years old now, same age that his father was when I was comparing him to his father, works in Bangalore, has 2 children. You know, it's not a reflection on his fertility rate. It's only a reflection about the number of, his aspiration about number of children that he wants to have. So he's got 2 children. What is his occupation? His occupation is, as a software engineer. He codes. He's writing code. That's what he does. What is annual income? His father's was 2,800. His is 14 lakhs. 14 lakhs, you must be having, let's say, about 8 years to 10 years out of college. At 33 years of age, you pass at about, let's say, 23. So you've got 10 years of work experience, and he's got 14 lakhs of salary. He's got a car, he's got mobile phones, he uses WhatsApp, he uses all of this. Telegrams are non-existent today. Look at the transformation that's taking place. He's got healthcare within 5 kilometers. Instead of going to ECR, you go at best up to maybe Mount Road. That's the difference in the world that's taking place. And lastly, he's insured and he's completely covered. See the change that's happened in 2 generations. And what led to this change? All changes influenced by the liberalization process that India underwent from 1990. So we should never underestimate the work that Manmohan Singh did, the cabinet of that time did, the various institutions, how they transformed themselves, the bureaucracy, and Mr. Matthew would have seen it at close quarters, and how they enabled the changes in legislation and how society was governed to get us to this point. So we're really fortunate to get to where we did after 1950 to where we are in 1930, in 1990. But let's look at one stage more. We looked at 1950, we looked at 1990, and let's look at how the world has changed for us, into 2020. First of all, our population was about 350 million people when we had independence, 360 million people in 1950. It became 870 million in 1990 and now 1.4 billion. We are right now the most populated country in the world. We must know that. We're greater than China. Our poverty levels then were 80%. 80% of India lived below poverty line. Poverty line was defined by United Nations as the inability to buy even, let's say, 2,500 calories of food in a day. And that was the definition of poverty. Since then, there's been the Tendulkar Committee in 2005, and then after that, the Ranganathan Committee in 2011, I think so, which have redefined poverty levels. But we are right now at about 16.4%. Some estimates put us closer to about 18% post-COVID. But let's say 1 out of 5 people that we meet in India is below poverty. Our GDP has grown tremendously. It's grown from 30 billion. You can see in 40 years, it went up 10 times to 90 billion. And then from to 320 billion. From 320 billion, it's now at 3 trillion. So it took us 40 years to go 10 times, and then it took us another 30 years to go 10 times. And you'll find this is the power of compounding. As economies change and grow, the transformations that happen after you get large are very, very significant. So, for example, in India today, we're going from 3 trillion to 5 trillion. And we are all a generation here that's part of it. The greatest changes in our life, in our personal life, happened when economies changed from 3 trillion to about 5 trillion. So we are very fortunate. Our parents have not been part of this set of changes that's happened. Our children will not be a part of this change. So in a sense, we're one of the most fortunate generations to live in India. And that's something we must know about the opportunities that we have as a set of people. So this is one terrific piece of data to see where the country is heading. Another piece of data to see is here, how's the road network. Road network, what is formerly about, let's say, 4 lakh kilometers, is now 63 lakh kilometers in India. And that's a big difference. India is adding about almost between 30 and 40 kilometers of roads per day, depending on how you measure it. If you measure each strip, each lane, or if you measure, collectively all the lanes that's being put together on a road. So we're getting about, about 30 to 40 kilometers of roads per day added, but we're at about 63 kilometers of roads. But the next data point is important. The British left us with about 53,000 kilometers of roads. And that has now gone up to about 68,000. So our progress in terms of number of kilometers added is not significant, but what you must know is that we had a great starting point. The Brits did well to leave us a road network. Our forex reserves, which was then about 1.8 billion, is now at 560 billion in India. 560 billion is not as much as what China's is, which is a few $1 trillion, but it still is significant. It was a little higher before the Ukraine war. We were closer to about 600, but now it's up to 560 billion. Also, our telecom subscribers, this is a big piece of data because we have a trinity known as JAM, Jandan, Aadhaar, and Mobile. And I'll explain that a little later into the presentation. We have about, let's say, 1.15 billion people, and total registered vehicles is about 295 million vehicles today. We are right now maybe the second or the third largest automobile manufacturer in the world. So the number of vehicles getting registered in India per year is at an all-time high. Direct tax collection, of course, from 1990 to now, from 14,000 crores has gone up to about 14 lakh crores. Significant data, all of this is. This is the country at large, but there's also some citizen data. What has happened to citizens in India? Literacy rates, which was formerly 18%, when we got independence in 1950, went up to about 50%, let's say approximately by 1990. It's almost 80% today, which means only 1 out of 5 people that you meet on a road is illiterate. You may look around you and in a bad moment, you may tell one of your friends is also illiterate, but that's just out of anger that you'll say. The real fact is that just 1 out of 5 people in India is illiterate. Life expectancy has gone up from 35 years to about almost 70 years today. So if you were born and lived around independence, you're expected to live only till you're 35. Isn't that terrible? 35. Until 1990, that number was 57. Today it is 67 years old. So if I rewind back, I'm 56 years old now. If I rewind back to 1990, if I think I'm in 1990 today, I would have had 3 years to live, going by expectancy levels from those days. That's the expanse. And in places like Kerala, life expectancy levels is even higher. It goes up to 78, 79. Syrian Christian families have an expectancy even in the 80s. Not a good thing sometimes, but it goes on. It's almost 80 years of age. Similarly, per capita electricity consumption is now almost 1,255 kilowatt hours, and GDP per capita is now 2,301. Of course, much less than $10,000 where China is right now, but India is slowly progressing up. Let's go in to look at city-wise data. How does India stack up city-wise in terms of per capita data? Delhi is at the highest with about 344,000 rupees. And as a state, Karnataka at 236,000 and Gujarat at 212,000. The Hindi belt, so to say, is the lower ones. Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Jharkhand. They're between 43,000 and 71,000. So you can see sort of the lopsidedness of development in India. There's a southern set of states that do fairly well, and there is the Hindi states that's in the north of India, which needs attention and which I think is getting rightfully so more attention these days. In cities, again, Mumbai, Calcutta, and Delhi are among the higher GDPs in India. Let's also look at the impact of economic growth on education, and this is a key data point. As I told you a little earlier on, about 80% of India is now educated, and that's a great number. But the second point is more crucial. The mean year for schooling, the number of years completed for people who are less than 25 years of age, has increased from 2.8 to 6.7, which means previously, if you're less than 25 years of age, it's likely that you're done just 2.5 years of education. That number has now gone up to 6.7, and that's crucial. 1.6 crore children, that's 16 million people, 16 million kids, have got the right to education under RTE. This is another significant point. The right to education, right to information, all these acts come out of the work done by NGOs. NGOs, the core of the NGO movement is built by institutes like MSSW, Tata Institute, XLR, etc., which produce people who support causes that lead to beneficial legislation that helps society. So this is another aspect where MSW has contributed definitely. In another data point, India produces almost about 2 million engineers a year for a economy that's about, let's say, 3 trillion. Contrarily, United States produces only about maybe 100,000 to 200,000 engineers for an economy that's 20 trillion. So that's a difference. India produces about 100,000 doctors, and that's a good number too. If you go on to the impact of economy on healthcare, healthcare is about a month ago, I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Bill Gates for breakfast. He was in India, traveling in India. He spent about 4 or 5 days. Once in 3 or 4 years, he comes here, meets a lot of people. So he called a few of us for breakfast. And he was saying that the two things that's vital to society is livelihoods and healthcare. And that's exactly where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is putting its energy, money, and focus on. Some of you sitting here who are working in community development, medical and psychiatry, etc., should try and get your careers into institutes of this type, which is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're doing outstanding work. They have goals like removing poverty in large tracts of land, removing polio from a country, taking away tuberculosis, etc. So these are societal changes that they're engineering. And to be a part of that process, I think, is, again, a life well lived. So, healthcare in India has remarkably changed. Life expectancy itself has gone up. Infant mortality has come down. Infant mortality is counted as number of deaths per 1,000 births. So what was formerly 66 in the year 2000 has now come down to 26. And 30 is a slightly older number. It's now at 26, which is, I think, a remarkable improvement, that lesser kids die at birth. Number of hospitals, we got 69,000 hospitals. At the time of independence in India, almost 90% of all our healthcare was met by mission hospitals. Mission hospitals are those hospitals created by churches and usually run, you'll find St. Philomena's, St. Stephen's, St. Thomas, CMC Vellore, etc. Now private sector is also invested into it, and we find more participation of the private sector. Our doctors per 1,000 ratio in India is also now improving very much. It's now gone to about 1:1,000. So I think we're making good progress in that. Life expectancy rate, as expected, in some of the southern states is better, but I'm sure the north will catch up in this. Economic growth also significantly impacts our financial security. So I'll spend a minute on this. In recent times, we've had the Jan Dhan accounts opened by the government of India. Jan Dhan account is an account that's opened in, let's say, 10 minutes time by any bank that you can go to with a very light KYC process. So which means that you're able to get an account opened easily. Previously, your financial security was not available because you didn't have a storehouse for your value. You could not deposit cash somewhere else. You could not accumulate cash, on the basis of which you cannot raise debt because you didn't have a bank account. So the government went out and opened 478 million bank accounts. Now combine this with telecom connections. India has 1.15 million mobile connections. You connect your mobile account, your bank account to your mobile phone. As a result of which, if this is your mobile phone, you can see your bank account on your phone. You can transact with it. You can transfer money to it. But the biggest break came when you had the direct benefit transfer process in India, which means if you got a subsidy from the government of India, instead of that going through other layers and reaching you, benefits were directly transferred to your bank account. So the DBT, as it's called, Direct Benefit Transfer Scheme, along with Jan Dhan account and mobile, transformed the way rural India managed its life. And this, I think, is a pivotal moment in society in India when the digital intervention helped create more financial security for individuals. I want to go into now, what was it then, what was it now, and what are the issues that's impacting society today. So you'll find that in other economies, I was in Japan recently. You find about 40% of the population there that's beyond a certain age point. There's a declining age group there. Across the world itself, you'll find the age people greater than the age of 60 being about 25 to 30% of the population. India is a relatively younger population. So we are able to export younger people from here to go and work in situations outside. In the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when the British had large estates in Suriname, Fiji, Guyana, British Columbia, lots of other places, they sent indentured labor from India to go and work there. So you'll find people like Alvin Kalicharan, are all people of Indian origin who went and worked in these places and made their life and careers there. As it happened then, when India exported labor in those situations, India is now exporting people who have studied and who've got skills. So I think we will become a sort of talent factory to the world, and it's a big India advantage. The second one is supply chains, manufacturing supply chains. In the last 2 years, especially with the ascent of China and the difficulties that sometimes the world has in dealing with China, there is a principle developing known as China plus one. So if you made all your mobile phones in China, the manufacturer now wants to make your phones in a China plus one state. So they want to make phones in China, but in addition to that, in a China plus one country, another country apart from China. So India today, in the last 3 years, has had a significant development of EMS, electronic manufacturing systems. In EMS, the type of technology that's there to make phones, wave soldering and all that is high end. So you got companies like Wistron, the Tata Group, etc. You found in Sri Perumbuthur itself, you'll find a number of companies that have come up in the EMS space. So India is now developing as a hub for EMS, and I think that's a terrific manufacturing development for India. India's own core sector development is also on a high now. Our average steel consumption was about 80 kilograms per person in India. China consumes almost about 600 kilograms of steel per person. So India's cement and steel consumption per person is going up, and all this leads to further downstream manufacturing that will come into India. Lastly, as mobile, Jandan, and as the digital revolution changed how banking and financial systems work, digital shopping, as you would see in your own house today, digital transactions and the digital economy is flourishing fast. It is estimated that the world will add about 13 to 15 trillion. India's GDP is 3 trillion. So the world will add about 3 Indias to global GDP because of the digital economy. So India's opportunity to be a producer of digital content that we feed into the digital economy is very large. And that opportunity, all of us sitting here is going to benefit from. I can see a number of people on their mobile phones, so I'm sure some of you are producing your digital products from, right now itself. So I'll get into another point about some structural changes that's happening to India, and this is important for students who are getting into PM and IR particularly, also in community and social development. In India, there's a movement from agri jobs to non-farm jobs. There's a movement from the informal sector to the formal sector. There's a movement from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. These are structural changes that's happening in Indian society. And you need to comprehend the impact of all of this on the Indian economy, which means if people are moving from a rural setting to an urban setting, more and more people will live in less and less kilometers. So which means if you've got, let's say, 80 cities with population greater than X, you'll find now that 80 becoming 800 sooner than later, because people are moving to smaller places of residences. And then you'll find it easier to deal with social benefits, etc., because you can build more hospitals in a more denser area, more community service centers in a denser area than spraying it out in larger country. So this is one development. Also, with the development of the formal economy in India, people will get employments with letters, defined benefits, provident fund, social benefits, etc. So all of this guarantees certain amounts of money that you will get as people. These are significant changes. And then from the movement from the unorganized to the organized means that organizations will need to be more compliant. We'll have to live in a more regulated system. We'll have to pay your taxes more regularly. So the government enforces regulation in a system to ensure that the degree of organized activity increases in India. This leads to just 2-3 points here. First one is that professional services will see a large increase. Your percentage growth is expected to be almost 60% in professional services. India is a services economy, and we expect that to grow even more. And the next point is that trade, restaurants, etc., QSR restaurants, etc., will grow. So you will find at least another 24% increase in employment in this area. So all this is, we've talked literally about the past. Let's take a look into the future. Where does all this lead us? If so much is happening in India, where does it take us to? Our GDP is now, and this will be interesting for you to look back, let's say in 10 years' time and see this is what you saw in the first memorial lecture of Dr. Kane George, and to compare backwards and see where it all led to. Our GDP today is about 3.15 trillion. By 2030, we expect it to be about 7 trillion, our GDP levels. Our agricultural exports is 50 billion today. We expect that to double in 7 years' time to 100 billion. Manufacturing to go from 140 billion to 400 billion. These are big numbers. These are serious numbers. In terms of renewable energy, we expect that to go from 155 gigawatts as it exists today, to 500 gigawatts. So which means we will have less fossil fuel based energy production in India, more green energy, and that's a significant data point. All this has trickle down effects of society. In per capita income, we expect to go from 2,300 to about 5,000 to 160. Water, I still remember when I was a kid in 1977-78, I used to go back to our family's ancestral house in Kerala. We used to be in a place called Perimbaur, which was about, let's say, 20-30 kilometers from Alvey. We never had piped water. We had water that was available from the well, and we had to go draw it up every morning if we had the energy to do it, or borrow somebody else's water. One of the two had to be done. All houses in India, which means 1.4 billion people will have piped water by 2030. Almost about 80-90% has happened already. So it's like significant progress has happened in that. And then in education, we find that higher education enrollment ratio will go up from about 1/4 to almost about the double of that, to almost 50%. And lastly, healthcare from about 8 per 1,000. We expect 8 per 10,000. We expect to reach about 20 per 10,000. So these are significant changes that will happen in the next 7 years. And this is not just because something is being done today. Societal changes of this order does not take place by pressing a switch. It happens with a lot of work that goes on for, let's say, about 10, 15, 20 years of work. So what began in 2000 and earlier in 1990 is showing up results that will give us all these outcomes by 2030. But we also have some challenges on the road, Periodic labor force survey, a recent one, shows that we are gravitating back to agriculture because we have Manrega schemes. As Manrega schemes, you're guaranteed about 100 days of work in every year. The government pays you a fixed fee. So many people are going back post-COVID to agricultural centers of work. That's not a very good thing. And the next point is very important. Our female workforce participation in labor was formerly in the high 30s. That fell back into the high teens about, let's say, 2 years ago. Our female workforce participation in India sometimes compares with sub-Saharan countries. 17, 18, 19, 20%. It's now getting into the mid-20s. It's now about 22 to 23. Unless we reach about, let's say, 35%, we can't count ourselves to be among developed nations in the world. So this is, for all of us going back to industry, this is something that we should keep in mind. Also, in terms of productivity, about 80% of Indians are currently working in the informal sector. Informal sector means you work without appointment letters, you work without contracts, you work without defined benefits, and there's no guarantee of getting back your employment when you go out. So we need to get more people into the formal sector. And of course, poverty and, it's a topic that we've already talked about. The last point here, which came out in the Oxfam report about concentration of wealth, is a big deal. And that is, we can actually influence some changes in this. Almost about 5% of India controls 60% of India's wealth, which is, I think, terrible. And unless you have a more equitable distribution of wealth happening, more people getting higher incomes. And so it means your tax structure should change, your access to public resources should change, natural resources as it's being distributed by current policy should be reviewed, etc. So this is sort of the country and what its trickle-down effect will be in terms of the economy. I also want to spend a moment thinking about who've been left behind. No discussion is complete by only talking about the good things of what a process is. I think we should also see about who's being left behind. And there are certain key data points here. Let's look at, let's take 1 or 2 cases in this. Let's take the case of orphans. There are about 26 million orphans in India, okay? We add about 26 million kids in India. We add number of new babies born in India is about 26 million. It's almost the equivalent of 1 Australia every year. we add as a country. That's the number of kids we add every year, despite lower fertility rates in recent times. The number of orphans who are adopted every year is only 4,000. So 26 million orphans, only 4,000 orphans adopted every year. The number of IVFs done is about almost 200,000. The number of people, it's estimated, we don't have definitive numbers yet, or number of people who registered for IVFs is almost about 26 million, through various, through a long period of time. So if, let's say, everybody who registers for an IVF adopts one child, you can actually do away with the orphan problem in India. But this is a very large community of orphans in India which need support. Manual scavenging. Despite many Supreme Court orders, you still have about 58,000 manual scavengers in India. And it's, to have people do this level of a task without automating it is, I think, it's a crime. Slum dwellers is around another 100 million people in India. So you add all of this, and I'll address under trial specifically later on, which I think has more to do with the social justice system of India and the criminal justice system. It's almost about 15 to 20% of the population of India live on the periphery. That means 1 out of 5 people that you see outside live on the periphery of mainstream India, which is not a good thing for a country of this size. We have 1.4 billion people in India, so imagine about 20% of them living on the periphery. No society, no civilization can consider itself to be successful unless it brings those people in the periphery into the mainstream. Unless the people who are disadvantaged and don't have access to resources and who are the minorities in some sense of the word are brought into the majority of society. And that, I think, is the one message that I want to leave with you while we're examining India in a resurgent context. How are we able to bring people from periphery into the mainstream? So, we look at some data here. I talked to you a bit about orphans in India. Only 370,000 children out of the 26 million are actually in childcare institutions. And there are 760 districts in India. About 120 of them are aspirational districts. And, despite all of this, only 1 in 5 districts don't have a childcare facility. And that's, I think, a large number. Adoption rate, I told you, is about 400,000, and IVF cycles about 200,000 here. These numbers that I referred to previously. Also, people with disabilities. There are about 50 million people in India with disabilities, which means the people with disabilities in India is almost the size of 2 Australias. But despite that, do we have ramps for people to come in with wheelchairs? How do we look at the people with blind? Our sensitivity to people with disabilities, I think, should go up a lot more. 1 in 12 households, about let's say 8% of people, 8% of households have, one member of the family who has a disability, and children with disability are likely to be 5 times more likely to be out of school than ever before. And then unemployment rate is, of course, very high among the disabled. Under trials is a under-focused area in life. We have about 500,000 people in jails in India. About 400,000 people of them are under trials, which means they are people who have not yet been convicted. So it means to say, I may have picked your pocket, I may be an accused, but I have not been convicted. So I possibly could get conviction as a pickpocket, and I may have served, let's say, about 2-3 months in time already in jail, waiting for my case to come up. And because I don't have access to the legal system, I don't have recourse to changing the conviction if required, I still remain in jail. So, the United States ran a very successful project called the Marshall Project. And it's still an ongoing project where they identify people who have been disadvantaged to be in jails, and then they work with the community to get them out. So in India, we've got 4 lakh people in jails, and this is something that we must consider, many of them for reasons that may not be entirely true. So this is an area that we can actually put some time on to. I want to finish with one point that, God's mercifully given all of us an opportunity to be in a great institute like MSW, created by a man with a vision, Mr. K. and George. He thought about the underprivileged. He thought about the people in the periphery of society. And he thought about the need to create resources to fight these battles. I think it's left to people like us now to fight on and to internalize the message that he started off with, and to ensure that we have thinking capacity, we develop resources, we work with networks, and we take the battle forward to ensure that people in the periphery of society come in. While India is resurgent and there's tremendous growth and impossibly good development happening here, let's not in the process forget the people in the periphery. So I leave you with that, and thank you for a patient hearing.
For the rest of the session, I request Mr. Ajit Isaac to take a seat on the dais, because we've heard him. And are we inspired or not? A bigger round of applause, please. You know, when we're in Delhi, we hear this slogan very often which says, "Ab tak khoon na khola to khoon nahi wo pani hai," meaning, iduvaraikkum rattam thalaikkalana, adu rattam illa, adu thanni dhaan. So what is it? Are you inspired? So much of information. How much more do we have to learn? How much more do we have to understand? And to give back to society like this is something that we have to ingrain into us and stand beside that 2030 mark and be part of history that says that we've done it too. Thank you, Ajit. That was absolutely inspirational. Now we're moving on to the not so serious, not so historical, not so difficult part to understand, the more fun, the college days and back. So we are starting off the felicitation to Mr. Ajit Isaac. I call upon the Alumni Association of the Madras School of Social Work, representatives from the Alumni Association. They want to give Ajit Isaac a small token of their love, affection, whatever. So please come on stage, Mr. Ashwin, who is the Secretary of the Alumni Association of Madras School of Social Work. They have a unique way of felicitating. So Ashwin will tell us about it and then felicitate Mr. Ajit Isaac.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And whenever we come to this college, there's always a lot of takeaways for us. And we're just pondering upon what best could be the gift. We thought books. He is more of an encyclopedia like PKB, sir. And we thought the best way is one is a book. And on behalf of him, we are gifted about, you work predominantly in education and healthcare. We found an opportunity to gift 35 children with stationary kits yesterday from the association members on your behalf, sir.
Thank you so much. Now he's in a hurry to go. We'll have to do this faster. I request Mr. Muthukumar Thanu, on behalf of the Madras School of Social Work, to felicitate Mr. Ajit Isaac.
Right, thank you. My honor, I think such a good friend of mine. I still remember meeting with him when he was in Airtel. I think he was heading other company along with other alumni by named Sudhakar. We gave the first project to him. I still remember the memory is still fresh. You know, Institute not only has pride about the kind of teachers the Institute has, right? Institute not only takes pride about the positioning that it has in the community, right? The Institute's reputation, positioning, etc., comes out is because of people like Ajit Isaac. I think we are very proud of you, Ajit. I think your speech was absolutely content-rich, right? Pregnant in expression, and importantly, so passionate. It was just not coming out of here, it was coming out of here. Each one of us sitting over here are very proud of you, Ajit. All the best. Thank you.
Now to the most informal part of our session, and probably the last few. Batch of 1990, batch of 1988 to 90. Many days, camp, the sessions under the Bodhi tree, the many days of fun, laughter, pranks. Ajit knows it all. But just to share it with this group and to run them through some of our own memories from our friends, I'm sorry to say that Mrs. Suchint Butler, she's not able to come here today. She's unwell. And so we have Vasumati reading out what many of our classmates have sent as felicitation for our beloved friend, Ajit Isaac. Please, Mrs. Vasumati Benny, please come over. What? You think I do that to you?
Okay. As usual, we always have the backup plan, but this is unexpected for me. But it's an honor that I'm here to felicitate my classmate, and all of us are here. Yeah. So on behalf of all my classmates, I read this. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. It's an honor for me to stand here today and say that I'm a classmate of Ajit Isaac and offer a felicitation speech to him on behalf of the class of 1990, Masters in Social Work. Indeed, gratifying when you peers and alumni recognize your achievements and acknowledge it. That indeed is an honor, and Ajit, I'm sure that this will mean much more to you than any other award. Today, we are here to celebrate the achievements and success of our classmate and friend who has taken the business world by storm and broken many records, like the largest IPO in 2016 in the staffing business and oversubscribed 147 times. Many of you know about Ajit's business accomplishments, but I'll be sharing with all of you a few tidbits from those of us who know him since June 1988. A few lines that I have been sent by a few classmates. First one, silver plus bike, North Star shoes, blue jeans. Ajit was your typical Chennai guy, but also much more than that, a bass voice that got the women weak at the knees. A crazy sense of humor, intelligent, as sharp as hungry dog, and success didn't have a choice but to choose him. Ajit's home was a home to many of us, and many of the batch took up residence at his home at all odd hours. Ajit was everyone's favorite brother. He had a ready smile, time to hear people out, and his advice and insights were always spot on. Another one, from college days, I remember that he was always cracking jokes and teasing folks. But when it came to working hard in anything, be it or Gaudipuram camp work or the project he drove, spearheaded where they made a homogeneous cigarette funeral walk of the cigarette, he pushed himself hard and nothing could stop him. Here I could add my words too. I remember all of us walking, making a campaign from college to the funeral ground in opposite to Loyola, all the way dancing for the beats. Remember MSW students dancing on the main roads. So what would have been our fate if our parents had seen then? Yes, fortunately, despite all the success, he has been extremely down to earth and believed in giving back to society. AJIT is now one of the largest hearted philanthropists in India and working towards upliftment of society as a whole by addressing public health, public policy and education. Another one. One aspect that stood out clearly in AJIT those days and even now, in his innocent curiosity. He would shamelessly ask and understand if he didn't know a subject or a topic or anything. He never cared about what others thought, and he was always open to learning from anyone. I still remember him sitting with Tangaraj, the then watchman of MSSW, and seeking some historical aspects of the village that Tangaraj hailed from. Even today, he won't hesitate to do that for his learning from anybody. The next important aspect that I would like to emphasize was that he was quite ambitious very early on. I was amazed by his aspirations of the future in those student days, and also his expressions on how the world should be ideally. That clearly made him what he is today, and I'm sure he's still exploring new ideas. His continuing ambitions is evident from what he has planned and announced as part of his 14-point charter of Care Workers Foundation and several other initiatives for health and sports. Is another one. In Ajit's case, it's not surprising at all, as we all knew during college days, that he was a peak performer. What is admirable is you chose to give back in a way that is well planned and sustainable. Keep it up. I can go on and on about Ajit and how he has touched our lives in many ways. In the interest of time, just want to say to him that you have and will always be an inspiration to this class of 1990. I wish, dear Ajit, the very best, and may all his dreams for the future come true. Thank you. Thank you all for this.
A friend very dear to all of us writes, "We will never forget the words, "Day machan, forget it man, birdie num num," and machan." He'll go on. Okay. So finally, as we come to the end, the batch of 1990, as quirky as he has helped us be, and a few other friends who really keep us on our toes with the thoughts, etc., etc., he has something beautiful to say. He said that Ajit reminds him of the very words in Frank Sinatra's song, "My Way." "I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each chartered course, each careful step along the byway, and much more than this, I did it my way." Thank you, Ajit, for being our friend. Thanks for being you. And here is our quirky little memento from the batch of 1990. We've stolen a chair. Not really. Sir didn't allow us to do that. So we bought a chair, but we stole a chair from our memories. And we're going to gift it to him. It's signed by all our friends We've got some more names to write into that. I have to say that since 1990, 8 of our classmates have left us. And in their memory, and in the memory of all of us in the group, thank you, Ajit. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being the human being you have been to all of us. Thank you. I request the batch of 1990, the few representatives, because it's a work day, many of them could not come here, but they're watching us live. Many of our classmates are watching us live. To all of you who are part of our WhatsApp group, and to all those who know the 1990 batch, I believe your presence is here in spirit. Thank you. He cried? Oh, I've arrived. Since 88 to 90, I've not been able to make him cry, and I've done it ultimately. Okay. So, to put an end to this wonderful occasion, I call upon Mrs. Anita Koshi, daughter of Professor K.N. George, who is part of the ICSW as an executive committee member, to propose the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks to all those who made this memorial lecture a success. My gratitude to Mr. AJIT ISSAC, Chairman Quess Corp, for his talk on the subject, Livelihood and a Resurgent India. You know, my father was so proud of you, and I couldn't think of a more befitting speaker for his inaugural memorial lecture. Thank you, Ajit, for taking the time off from your busy schedule and joining us here today. Your message was very informative, and it left, for many of us, a lot to think on, to ponder about. Thank you for this. We are also honored to have with us Honorary Chairman, Mr. K. Matthew, Honorary Secretary, Mr. Muthukumar Tanu, Mr. Abraham Zachariah, National Treasurer, ICSW. A special thanks to Padma, Mrs. Padma Kumar, Secretary of ICSW. My also sincere thanks to Dr. Raja Samuel, Dean, Dr. Suhasini, staff of MSSW, to Dr. Sudha Marti, staff coordinator of this event from MSSW. A special thanks to the alumni of MSSW, Mr. Balaji, President of the Alumni Association of MSSW, to the office bearers of the Alumni Association, to the ICSW office bearers, and all the members for their contribution to the success of this memorial lecture. Finally, I would like to thank the students of the MSSW for their enthusiasm and for their participation in this event. Once again, I want to thank all of you for making this a remarkable memorial lecture. And there's somebody I forgot, Mr. John Zachariah, Treasurer, MSSW. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all. Have a good day.
I request all of you to stand for the national anthem. And this time you'll sing it because I don't have it recorded. Janagana mana adhinayaka jaya he Bharata bhagya vidhata Punjab Sindh Gujarat Maratha Dravida Utkala Bhangal Vindhya Himachal Yamuna Ganga Uchchal Jaladi Taranga Tava Shubha Name Jage Tava Shubha Ashish Mange Gaye Tava Jaya Gatha Jana Gana Mangaladhayaka Jaya He Bharata Bhagya Vidhata Jaya He Jaya He Jaya He Jaya 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 He. Thank you.